widowed rancher, searched for milk for his newborn, until the neighbor girl knocked with a full breast, and Saeed, let me feed her. Dry Willow, Colorado, early spring, 1879. The snow had not yet melted from the shadowed corners of the hills, and the wind still cut like a knife through the broken fences and bare cottonwoods that lined the edge of Turner Ranch. Cold lingered in the bones of the earth, as if winter refused to leave. Inside the weather-beaten cabin, Jack Turner sat slouched beside the stone hearth, holding a wailing infant against his chest. His eyes were hollow, bloodshot. His shirt was stained with spilled milk and old sweat, his hands shaking as he tried, again, to coax his daughter to drink. "Come on, baby girl, please," he whispered. "Just a little more, please." The bottle trembled in his grip. Goat's milk, warmed over the fire, splashed against the child's chin. Lily turned her head away, her mouth tight, her tiny fists thrashing. Her cries grew hoarse, then desperate. Jack sighed, the sound of it more like a groan. His back slumped. He had not slept in days. Since Mary died, bleeding out before the midwife could even finish wiping the child clean, Jack had been holding it together by thread and bone. He buried his wife on a Tuesday. Lily turned 2 weeks old the same day. Now she was 2 months old, and she was starving. He had tried everything. He fed her goat milk, rice water, even sugar water once, though he had regretted it when she cried harder. He had walked to every nearby homestead, knocking on doors like a beggar. "My girl needs milk," he had said. "Does anyone have a nursing wife?" Most turned him away gently. Some said nothing at all. One man grunted. "Wife's dried up 2 winters ago. Try the goats." Another woman said, "That's what bottles are for, Mr. Turner. You'll figure it out." He did not. Now Lily was losing weight, her cheeks no longer full. Her skin looked too pale, her breath too fast. Jack stood slowly, rocking her in his arms, as he walked to the door. The wind howled through the cracks in the frame. He opened it, reached out with one hand, and pinned a small piece of paper to the outside with a bent nail. The note read, in uneven script, "If anyone has milk to spare, please help my baby girl." He closed the door. The wind banged against it again and again. Back at the hearth, he sat with Lily in his lap, trying to hum to her. His voice was cracked, dry. The bottle lay on the floor, rolling gently. Lily's cries had weakened, shifting into small gasps between hiccups. Her face was flushed, wet with tears. She curled in against him, fists still clenched. Jack pressed his lips to her forehead. His hands were rough, cracked from working with leather and fence wire, but they trembled now, as if holding a piece of glass. "I am trying," he whispered. "I swear I am trying." The fire popped. His shadow wavered on the wall behind him. He leaned back against the post, eyes closing for a moment too long. But Lily whimpered, and he jerked upright, arms tightening around her. He had never known fear like this, not when wild horses broke loose, not when storms tore his barn roof off. Not even when he stood beside Mary's grave with dirt caked under his nails and a hole in his chest where hope used to be. His daughter was all he had left, a heartbeat that depended on his own. And tonight, even his strongest hands felt useless. He once tamed stallions with one hand. Tonight, he trembled just trying to hold a bottle. The wind had picked up again. Rain slashed sideways against the cabin's windows, each gust rattling the loose panes like bones shaking in their sockets. Jack paced the wooden floor, Lily pressed against his shoulder, her cries now reduced to pitiful whimpers, thin, exhausted gasps from a baby who no longer had the strength to scream. The fire was dying. He had fed it everything: pine, scraps of old furniture, even Mary's rocking chair last week. Still, the room felt cold. Then came the knock. 3 sharp raps, just above the howling of wind. Jack froze. For a moment he thought he imagined it. But then it came again, firmer this time, not the wind, a person. He opened the door. A woman stood beneath the porch beam, soaked through, her shawl dripping, her boots sunk in mud, blonde hair plastered to her cheeks. She held a canvas satchel in one hand, the other clutching her coat closed at the neck. Jack blinked. Maggie? She looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed, swollen but steady. Her voice trembled. I saw your note. I've heard her crying at night. She took a breath. Let me feed her, please. Jack stared at her, not understanding for a second. His eyes dropped to the satchel, then back up to her pale face. You mean? I still have milk, she said quietly. My son passed 6 weeks ago. He was 11 weeks old. Rain streaked down her cheek, mingling with something else. I have to do something with it, she said, barely audible. Let me help her. Jack stepped aside wordlessly. Maggie moved into the room slowly, as though unsure she would be allowed to stay. Inside, the warmth hit her, and she nearly staggered. She set down her satchel, eyes immediately drawn to Lily. The infant was trembling, her cries now no more than rasping little breaths. Maggie's arms reached out instinctively. May I? She whispered. Jack hesitated only a second, then handed over the baby. Maggie sat on the old rocker by the hearth, cradled Lily in the crook of her arm, and unbuttoned the top of her dress. Jack turned quickly, facing the window. He stared into the dark. Behind him, a soft sound, suckling. Wet, desperate, rhythmic. Then a deep exhale from the baby, and silence. Jack's eyes closed. Maggie looked down at the small face nestled against her chest. Milk dribbled from the corner of Lily's mouth, and for the first time since her son died, Maggie felt the ache in her chest ease, not the physical kind. She's hungry, she whispered. Poor thing. Jack turned his head slightly but did not look. She hasn't eaten in almost a day. More silence. Then Maggie asked softly, what was her name? Lily, he said, still staring at the rain. Mary named her. The firelight flickered across the floor. The cabin was quiet now, save for the soft, contented breaths of the nursing baby. Jack's hands were balled into fists at his sides. Not out of anger, but something closer to grief. Relief. Helplessness. She looks strong, Maggie murmured, like her father. Jack swallowed. His voice, when it came, was hushed. Thank you. Maggie looked up at him, her lips quivering. I needed this too, she said, more than you know. By the third morning, Maggie had moved her things into the small room off the side of the house. The old tack room, once used to store saddles and rope, now cleared of dust and fitted with a cot, Jack had dragged in himself. He had even mended the broken latch on the window. She woke early, before the rooster crowed, quietly boiling water with dried willow bark and chamomile. She placed the tin cup beside Jack without a word, then gently lifted Lily from her cradle and nursed her by the firelight. Lily was already brighter, her skin warmer, her cries softer. Her small fingers curled around Maggie's shirt, her lips drawing steady, greedy breaths as she fed. Jack remained awkward around Maggie, uncertain how to show his gratitude. He spent most of his time working outside, fixing fences or hauling wood, but he started doing small things, leaving a bowl of warm stew for her at lunch, folding the extra blanket at the foot of her cot, replacing the squeaky hinges on the washroom door. He even repaired the broken leg on her rocking chair without saying a word. He rarely spoke first, but every night, after Lily fed and slept, they sat near the hearth, Maggie with her knitting, Jack with a tin of coffee gone cold. Silence stretched between them, not heavy, but present, shared. On the 5th night, Maggie broke it. I held him for 2 days, she said, eyes on the flickering flame. My boy. Jack looked up. He died from fever. I didn't know what to do. He just stopped breathing. And I just sat there, waiting. For anyone. Her voice was even, but her fingers trembled around the yarn. No one came, she said, not until he started to smell. Jack didn't speak. He poured her another cup of coffee instead, and then, without a word, fed another log to the fire. The flames rose higher. Maggie gave him a small, grateful nod. She never had to ask for help with Lily. When she fed the baby, Jack always made himself scarce. He would quietly step outside or retreat to the barn, returning only to find Maggie rocking Lily with the look of peace that had not touched her in months. He never commented, but once she noticed he had placed a hot stone wrapped in cloth beside the rocking chair to warm her feet while she Saturday. She didn't say thank you, he didn't ask her to. Their conversations grew a little longer, a little deeper. She told him about her parents back east, how she had come to Colorado with her late husband, who died in a mining accident before their son was born. Jack listened, eyes always steady, nodding more than speaking. In return, Jack told her about Mary, how they had courted during harvest season, how she had once tamed a wild Mustang better than any man he knew. She was soft-spoken, he said once, but when she told a horse to stop, it stopped. Maggie smiled faintly. Sounds like she was the strong one. She was, Jack agreed. Each night, the silence between them began to feel less like absence and more like understanding. Neither reached for the other. But sometimes, when their eyes met in the orange glow of the fire, something unspoken passed between them, gentle, cautious, but real. Not love, not yet, but something that looked like healing. And in that quiet corner of the world, amid creaking wood and winter winds, it was more than either had hoped to find again. The storm had rolled in fast, soaking the dirt road into thick mud by the time Maggie returned from town. The market had been crowded that morning, spring finally stirring beneath the frost, but no warmth touched the eyes that followed her. She had gone for flour and soap. She came back with whispers cutting deeper than any winter wind. She's living with him, you know. Just waiting for him to give her the Turner name. A widow feeding another woman's child like it's her own? It's unnatural. Milk's not the only thing she's offering. Maggie had heard it all before she reached the mercantile steps. No one said it to her face, of course. They just turned their backs slightly too slow, their voices pitched just loud enough. She stood frozen near the shelves of beans and sugar, hands clenched at her sides. When she caught her reflection in the shop window, she barely recognized the pale, stiff figure staring back. Her chest felt tight, her breath shallow. By the time she got back to the ranch, her arms were trembling. She handed Jack the sack of supplies and disappeared into her room, without a word. Jack watched her go. He didn't ask. That night, while nailing down a loose board on the porch, he overheard two ranch hands from the neighboring field passing by on horseback. "Bet he's got her warming his bed too," one muttered. "Hell, wouldn't blame him, but don't see why the kid's got a drink from someone else's tit." Jack didn't move, but the hammer in his hand shook once, then tightened until his knuckles went white. He turned slowly, watching the men ride off through the dusk. He said nothing, did nothing. But when he returned inside, the silence in the cabin felt different, heavy, loaded. Dinner was untouched. Maggie sat in the rocker, Lily asleep in her arms. She didn't look up when Jack entered. He placed the food on the table, waited, then turned and stepped outside again. Rain started before midnight, thin, cold. Maggie had not moved for hours. She didn't eat. She didn't speak. Her eyes were locked on the fire as if it were the only thing holding her together. Somewhere behind the silence was something far deeper than shame. It was fear, not for herself, not for her name, but for Lily. In the blackest hour of night, while Jack slept in the front room with a rifle by the door and boots still on, Maggie crept from her cot. She wrapped Lily in a soft quilt, held her close, and stepped out into the rain. The path to the old barn was slick, nearly invisible. Each step was a struggle. Mud splashed up her skirts. Thunder groaned in the hills. Lily whimpered in her arms, then began to cry, a hungry, frightened cry. Maggie clutched her closer, tears mixing with rain. "I'm not her real mother," she whispered into the wind. "Maybe I never deserved to be." She reached the barn and pushed the door open with her shoulder. The wood creaked. Inside it was dark, the smell of old hay and rust thick in the air. Shadows pooled in corners. She sank down into a corner, hugging Lily tightly. The baby cried louder, tiny fists trembling against Maggie's skin. Maggie rocked her, voice cracking. "I just wanted to help. she whispered. "That's all. I just wanted to help." She pressed her lips to Lily's damp hair and sobbed quietly as the storm roared outside. Thunder rattled the beams. Rain hammered the barn roof. She swallowed against the sobs, rocking Lily with trembling arms, her own heart shaking as fiercely as the storm around them. In that dark, cold barn, she whispered into Lily's ear, "I love you, baby. I stayed for you. I swear I stayed for you." And as the storm raged, she held her child and cried, hoping against fear that morning might bring safety again. The fire had long gone out, and the sky outside the cabin windows glowed a faint, ghostly blue, the color of storms and early dawn. Jack stirred on the cot in the front room, the creak of wood and the silence of absence jolting him awake. He sat up fast. The cradle was empty. The quilt was gone. So was Maggie. His boots were on in seconds. He grabbed his coat, yanked the door open, and was hit with a blast of wind and sleet. Rain had turned to snow sometime after midnight. The storm was coming in heavy now, thick flakes swirling across the field, wind howling down from the ridge. "Maggie!" he shouted, stepping off the porch into the snow. "Maggie!" No answer, just the hiss of ice against wood, the bitter breath of the prairie biting into his face. He mounted his gelding bareback, kicking the horse into motion before he could feel the cold seep into his bones. Snow blew sideways. The light from the cabin disappeared behind him in seconds. His heart pounded in his chest. Where could she have gone? And with Lily? The child hadn't fed since before sunset. She was so small, too small. Jack's voice cracked as he shouted again, this time more desperate. "Maggie!" He passed the fence line, scanning the dark. Snow piled high against the barn doors. Wind slammed into his back, and still he rode. Then, through the sheets of snow, he saw it, the faintest flicker of movement at the old lumber shed near the edge of the property, a broken door swinging, a flash of pale fabric. He dismounted before the horse stopped moving, stumbling through the drifts toward the open door. "Maggie!" Inside the shed, the smell of old pine and rusted iron hung in the cold. In one corner, curled against a stack of split logs, Maggie sat clutching Lily, her body hunched, her dress soaked through. She didn't look up. Lily was sobbing, weak and tired, and Maggie rocked her as if that alone could erase the world. Jack stepped into the dark and dropped to his knees beside them. "Maggie," he said, voice low, breathless, "look at me." She did. Her face was streaked with tears and snow, her lips trembling. I thought maybe I shouldn't stay," she said. "They're right. I'm not her mother." Jack's voice broke as he reached for his coat, wrapping it around both of them, careful not to pull Lily from her arms. "You didn't take her from me," he whispered. "You gave her back to me." Maggie's breath caught, her eyes widened. Then the tears came, harder this time. She pressed her face into his shoulder and sobbed, for her son, for the baby in her arms, for the shame and the silence and the aching, unspoken fear. Jack held her tighter. The snow howled outside, but inside the shed there was only warmth now, not from fire, but from skin, from breath, from the weight of two people who had nearly lost something too precious to name. They stayed like that for a long time. Maggie curled into his arms, Lily between them, the child's breathing softening again. Jack brushed the wet hair from Maggie's forehead. "You don't ever have to run again," he murmured. "Not from me." And for the first time, Maggie let herself believe it. She leaned into him, and this time she didn't pull away. The storm had passed by morning, leaving a silver crust of snow glittering across the field. The sky above was cloudless now, cold and blue as polished steel. Inside the Turner house, the fire was crackling again, and something else lingered in the air, not just warmth, but purpose. Maggie woke to the scent of fresh bread baking and the soft creak of footsteps on the porch. She sat up slowly, still wrapped in Jack's coat from the night before. Lily stirred beside her, cheeks rosy, arms stretched like a tiny blossom warmed by spring. It took her a moment to remember where she was. Then she heard it, hammering. She rose, tucked Lily close, and moved quietly toward the sound. Through the cracked door of the room next to Jack's, she saw him. Kneeling on the wooden floor, sleeves rolled to his elbows, his hands smoothed over the edge of a new wooden crib. The light from the window fell across his back as he carved slow, careful letters into the headboard. Lily. Then underneath, smaller, Turner. He ran a hand over the name once it was done, as if sealing something more than wood. Then, without turning, he said softly, "I wasn't sure how to ask." Maggie's breath caught. He stood, wiped his hands on a rag, and stepped aside so she could enter. The room was freshly swept. A braided rug near the bed, a folded quilt at the foot, a small shelf lined with a few carved wooden toys Jack must have saved. And on the table by the window, a piece of paper, weighted down with a small, smooth stone. She stepped closer. Read the words. Stay, not as a helper, as her mother. Her hands trembled. Behind her, Jack didn't move. He stood in the doorway, boots still damp, hair tousled, uncertainty shadowing his features. This wasn't a question he was used to asking. It wasn't a proposal. It wasn't a promise made with rings or vows. It was an invitation, a choice. Maggie looked down at Lily, cradled in her arms. The baby blinked up at her, content and warm, cheeks full and mouth wet with milk from the dawn feeding. Safe. A tear slid down Maggie's cheek, but she was smiling. She pressed her lips to Lily's forehead, then looked up at Jack. "I didn't just save her," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "She saved me, too." Jack stepped into the room then, closer now, not touching, just near enough. "I never thought I'd have another family," he said. "I never planned on this." Maggie nodded. "Me either." She looked around the room again. The crib, the blanket, the toys, every detail carved not from obligation, but from care. It wasn't grand, but it was safe. It was offered. And for someone who had spent months aching for a place to belong, it was everything. They stood in silence, not needing more words. The air between them was filled with the sound of the fire in the next room, the rustle of Lily's breath, and the quiet echo of something beginning, not loudly, not suddenly, but surely. That night, Maggie tucked Lily into the new crib. Her fingers lingered on the carved letters. She traced each curve as if to promise, "I choose this. I choose her. I choose us." Then she looked out the window. The stars were visible, bright and sharp in the clean night sky. Somewhere, an owl called softly from the woods. The wind no longer howled, it hummed. Outside, snow melted in slow drops from the roof. And for the first time since her son died, Maggie slept without waking from dreams. Not a helper, not a visitor. A mother. The air that morning felt too still. No birdsong, no wind, just the heavy silence that comes before something breaks. Maggie was at the hearth, rocking Lily in her arms, when she saw the dust cloud rising from the south trail. 4 men on horseback, thick coats, wide hats. Strangers. Jack was already at the door before the horses reached the gate. He had seen them coming. She stepped onto the porch behind him, Lily tucked close, her instincts tightening like a fist in her chest. "Stay inside," Jack said, his voice calm but firm. Maggie hesitated. He turned to her, softer now. "Please." She nodded and slipped back into the house, leaving the door slightly ajar. The men dismounted. One of them, older, broad-shouldered with a leather ledger in his hand, stepped forward. "Jack Turner?" the man called. Jack didn't answer right away. "You inherited some debts, Turner," the man said. "From your wife's side, land notes, signed by Mary Turner a year before she died, and they're past due." Jack squared his shoulders. "I know about the notes." The man flipped the ledger open. "This property covers the balance. We're here to take what's owed." Jack said nothing. The silence stretched. Inside the house, Maggie stood frozen, every breath drawn in shallow. She couldn't hear every word, but the tone said enough. She pressed Lily closer and listened as the voices shifted, louder now, less formal. Another man added, "You can stay on the land, but only if you work it for us. Half of everything you grow, everything you raise, Ours. Jack's voice came through low and clear. No. The second man scoffed. Then maybe we tear down this cabin, take what's worth hauling, sell the baby's cradle for firewood. That was when Maggie heard it. A gun cocking. Her heart slammed into her ribs. But the shot never came. Instead, Jack spoke again, louder now. You touch one board on this house, one thing that belongs to them, and I swear to God, I'll bury the debt with your bones. A tense silence followed. Maggie moved closer to the door, inching it open just enough to see. Jack stood tall, unflinching, but his rifle stayed lowered. He wasn't going to shoot unless he had to. She could see it in the way his fingers flexed, ready, not reckless. I've got a better idea, he said finally. You want payment? Fine. Take the south field. I'll work it. I'll give you half the yield at season's end. The older man narrowed his eyes. And if the crop fails? Then I owe you nothing, Jack said. Same risk you'd take if you seized it. But if it grows, if it's a good year, you'll get more than you came for, and no blood. The men exchanged glances. Finally, the older one nodded slowly. Fine. You've got until harvest. They mounted their horses again, and the group turned without another word. Jack stood there until the dust settled behind them, his jaw tight, his breath visible in the morning chill. When he came back into the house, Maggie was waiting. She didn't speak. He walked straight past the kitchen, through the living room, to the place where she stood holding Lily. He looked at the baby first, always the baby first, and touched her head gently. Then his eyes met Maggie's. No one threatens what I've built, he said quietly. Not again. Maggie said nothing at first. She just looked at him, the soot on his coat, the tight line of his mouth, the way his shoulders carried every weight without complaint. Then she reached up and placed her hand flat against his chest, where his heart beat strong beneath the flannel. It was the first time she touched him like that, not out of need, not from fear, but from something far deeper. A thank you, a vow, a beginning. 3 years had passed. The storms were fewer now, the winds gentler, the land kinder. The sun stretched over the Turner homestead, golden and wide, warming the earth that once seemed too cold for second chances. Lily's laughter rang through the air like wind chimes as she chased a blue ribbon across the yard, her small boots kicking up dust. She was nearly 4 now, quick-footed, sharp-eyed, and bright as a prairie morning. Maggie sat on the porch steps, a hand resting on her swollen belly. Her hair had grown longer, streaked by sun, and her cheeks carried the gentle fullness of late pregnancy. She watched Lily play with the quiet smile of someone who had known deep sorrow and chosen joy anyway. Inside the barn, Jack was finishing a task he'd begun the winter before, carving a new wooden sign for the gate. His hands were steady, the letters bold. Turner and Rowe Ranch. Not just his anymore, not hers, theirs. He wiped his brow, brushed the sawdust from his sleeves, and stepped outside to where Maggie waited. She looked up at him, shielding her eyes from the Sunday. Finished? She asked. He held up the sign. She smiled. Looks like it's real now. It's been real a long time, he said softly. This just makes it official. Together, they walked to the fence line, where Lily was already kneeling in the dirt with a small trowel, waiting. A sapling stood beside her, a white apple tree from a cutting Jack had nursed for months in the shed. Maggie crouched beside Lily, guiding her small hands as they dug the hole. Jack placed the tree gently into the earth, covering the roots, packing the dirt firm. They stood back as a breeze tugged at the leaves, the first of many breaths the tree would take in its long life. What if it doesn't grow? Lily asked, squinting up at her father. Jack knelt beside her, brushing a curl from her face. Then we try again, he said, but this one's strong. Like you. And Mama? Lily said. Jack looked at Maggie, her hand on her belly, the wind catching her hair. She's the strongest of us all, he said. They stood in silence, watching the tree settle into its new home. The white apple blossoms had not yet bloomed, but they would. In time, just like this family had, rooted in pain, nourished by choice. That night, as the stars spread like wildflowers over the sky, Jack sat on the porch with Maggie beside him, her head against his shoulder. Lily slept inside, her arms wrapped around the stuffed mare Jack carved for her last Christmas. The fire in the hearth glowed steady through the window. Maggie's voice was quiet, thoughtful. "You know what I think about sometimes?" "What?" "How I came here with nothing but milk and grief," she said. "And now—" Jack kissed the top of her head. "You gave her more than milk," he whispered. "You gave her a mother." Maggie looked down at her belly, then out toward the tree. "She gave me more than I ever gave her," she said. "She gave me you." He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Their story wasn't written in bloodlines. It wasn't about fate or family names. It was about choice, about showing up, staying through the storm, and choosing to love what the world once told you not to. Jack reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "She didn't come to save a baby," he said. "She came to save herself." Maggie smiled, eyes glistening. "And somehow we all got saved," she said. The wind stirred the blossoms outside. The new sign swung gently on its hooks. Turner and Rowe Ranch. And beneath that apple tree, a promise rooted deeper than words. If this tree ever blooms, our love is still alive. And it would. Every spring. She came with nothing but milk and grief. He gave her a name, a home, and a child who called her Mama. They weren't bound by blood, but by something even stronger: choice. If this story moved you, if you felt the chill of loss, the warmth of love, and the quiet power of rebuilding a life, hit that like button and subscribe to Wild West Love Stories. We bring you tales of heartbreak, healing, and romance on the American frontier every week, for those who believe that even in the wildest lands, love still finds a way. Subscribe now and ride with us into the next story.